I suck at Sonic the Hedgehog. And I'm not sure whether or not to be surprised by that. On the one hand, I've never really played a Sonic game until I committed myself to giving this one right here, the OG, a serious try. I mean, I have played Sonic games before, a little bit, but I hadn't dedicated any significant amount of time to any of them before I did so with this game. Then on the other hand, I have played the shit out of countless other 2D platformers. Shouldn't the skills picked up from one 2D platformer be transferable to another? Well, I think yes, most of the time the skills will be transferable, but I'm not sure any other 2D platformer is quite like Sonic the Hedgehog, excluding the direct knockoffs that attempted to cash in on its popularity, of course. Anyway, yes, I suck at playing Sonic games. I've always said that I don't know how to play them. To go fast or to not go fast, that is the question. And that's Sonic the character's entire deal. He runs fast. Go ask a random person on the street who may or may not be a gamer to name something about Sonic the Hedgehog, and they're going to say, he runs really fast. But while playing this first game in the franchise, I realized pretty quickly that, at least until you've learned the stages, it is not in your best interest to go fast. Another thing that stood out to me as a new player is Sonic's method of attack. For quite a while, I didn't fully realize that jumping into an enemy is a method of attack. In most 2D platformers, that's how you die. I don't think I fully grasped it until I read the manual, actually. Even while I was actively and successfully executing the attack early on, I somehow gaslit myself into believing that doing so would kill me. After all, every other platformer trains the player not to do that. So if anyone else would like to tell me their history with this franchise, they can do so in the comments section. But my history is that I played a Sonic game as a kid on a model of the Sega Genesis that had like 10 cartridge slots. It was like if you grabbed a Genesis from the front and the back and stretched it like rubber, and they had it at my childhood orthodontist's office in the waiting room. I was pretty young at the time, and I hadn't ever seen a regular Sega Genesis before. No one in my family or friend circle had one. Anyway, I'd play that Sonic game every time I went to the orthodontist and sat in the waiting room, but, you know, it was never for very long, and never for more than a few times a year or whatever that I actually went there, so I never got good, brah. Anyway, upon looking up a map of the first level of Sonic 2, I came to about 99% sureness that the game that I played when I was young was Sonic 2, and not this first one, which seems to me to represent humble beginnings for the franchise. You can't do the thing where you roll Sonic into a ball and slingshot him forward. What's that called? The Google machine tells me it's the spin dash, yeah. But you can press down to roll downhill. So yeah, I'm very unfamiliar with this franchise. It's definitely a blind spot for me. And in a way, it's disrespectful to an iconic franchise and character to immediately begin talking about Mario instead of Sonic, which is what this video is supposed to be about, so I made a point not to do so right away, but I think it's relevant to note that I was definitely a Mario kid when I was growing up. And yeah, they were obviously the big two of platformers in the 16-bit era, Mario and Sonic, and from a gameplay perspective, I much prefer Mario for a variety of reasons, but I think it's undeniable that as a character and as a mascot, Sonic is way cooler. He has an actual personality. Someone may argue that Mario shouldn't have a personality because he's an everyman and kids are meant to just latch on and project themselves onto him, but that blank slate everyman personality doesn't work as much when it's a fat Italian plumber. What kid can really relate to that? Sonic, on the other hand, isn't meant for a kid to relate to or project themselves onto, because he's meant to be aspirational. Sonic is cool. He's a casual master of his craft. He's gonna save the day with a chili dog in hand and then go, yeah, whatever. We're not meant to say, I am Sonic. We're meant to say, I strive to be Sonic. He's such a great mascot that it's kinda hard to believe that this game was not a launch title for the Genesis. The console came out in North America in '89, and this game in '91. The initial attempt at a mascot character from Sega was Alex Kidd. And maybe we'll talk about Alex Kidd on the channel someday, but today is not the day. For a final comparison to Mario, in my review of the original Super Mario Bros. On here, I commented on the sense of momentum you get when platforming across the two-dimensional plane, and how much of a step forward it was to get that feeling back in 1985. The momentum in this game I feel has to represent another step forward in gaming history. It's so good. It feels so nice while you're playing, and it's something you need to get used to because it can carry you a lot farther than you think, sometimes directly into bottomless pits or spikes, or it can just cause you to misjudge a jump and screw you up that way. I was often thinking during a lot of my deaths that this game could have been called Haha Gotcha, the video game. But it probably wouldn't have sold as well as Sonic the Hedgehog, and there was already a game with a similar title. The thing is, when I'm playing Sonic, I want to go fast, but the punishment for going fast can be really harsh. A lot of the threats, at least in this first game, are totally off-screen. And even if you have rings, which act as a hit point, some of the obstacles can cause instant kills regardless, and it can happen quick. There is a ton of trial and error in this game. You really have to play with caution and use the camera scrolling function that allows you to look up or down before you make a move. Like I said, death in this game can be extremely sudden, and there are multiple parts of multiple levels where if you miss a jump, you can be left stranded without getting a second chance. All that said, the level of difficulty really isn't that high with some level memorization and mastery of the controls, but the level of forgiveness, just brutal. I often talk in my reviews about the level of difficulty versus the level of forgiveness in video games, and I tend to prefer high difficulty, high forgiveness games. What I mean by that is, I like the challenge of a really difficult level, but I don't like the punishment that comes along from being sent all the way back to the beginning of a game. And that's exactly what this game does. You get 3 lives, and that's fucking it. Well, you can earn more, but that's just it. They're earned, not given, and earning them is not easy. There are some hidden 1-ups in the levels, but for the most part, earning an extra life requires collecting 100 rings. Rings that you lose upon taking a hit, and the ring count for each level is scarce enough that you basically have to be perfect if you want a chance to get 100. Getting 99 rings and then taking a hit is extremely frustrating. Ask me how I know. You can also earn continues in the bonus stages, which are effectively 3 lives in one, but we'll talk about that later. Spoiler warning, it's arguably even more difficult to pull off. There is also no method to save a game, and no password system either. When I'm having trouble with an old, unforgiving game without save or password functions, I typically play the game one day until I've run out of lives and continues, then pick it up again the next day and repeat the process, and do it again and again each day so I can gradually get better at it without getting too frustrated or burned out. That's what I did here, and made it further and further each day until I hit my stopping point, which we'll talk about when we get there. And in fairness to this game, despite its punishing nature, once you've played it a couple of times, it's very easy to speed through the early levels very quickly if you're so inclined. Even an unexperienced player such as myself can bang them out in less than a minute. But it's a double-edged sword, because you might think you've mastered a certain early level, but it only takes one minor slip-up before this game just pulls the rug out from underneath you. True mastery can reward you in more ways than one, though. If you time jumps exactly right, there are parts where enemies essentially act as points on a bridge to rocket you to the finish line. Further, there are alternate paths to discover, as well as secret areas with a number of power-ups clustered together. Yeah, these include invincibility, ultra-fast running, a bulk lot of 10 rings, and what seems to be the most common, a shield, which functions as an additional hit point. Some of these power-ups are out in the open as well, and some are hidden in trees, and so on. It's a real treat to discover a bunch of goodies that you missed on your first go-around, and an example of how the repetition isn't entirely a bad thing. So yeah, this is a very unforgiving game, and I can't help but think that the only reason why is because otherwise, without forcing the player to do the early stages again and again, it could be considered a very short game. I also think a lot of it is pretty unpolished. Enemies are inconsistent as to whether or not you can jump on them, and that's a huge pet peeve of mine. Some are obvious in their character designs that they can't be attacked, but others are pure trial and error, like many things in this game. The caterpillars pissed me off so bad. This is exactly what I'm talking about with a lack of polish, because their hitboxes are so inconsistent. At one point, I thought I couldn't hit them at all, and had to just try to tediously avoid them in these cramped spaces. And once I hit both the part that kills them, and the part that causes Sonic to take a hit, both at the same time. The fireballs, also in the marble zone with the caterpillars, seem to just have no pattern. They drove me crazy too. Another thing I really didn't understand as a new player were the bonus rounds. What exactly are the Chaos Emeralds that I'm trying to earn for 100% completion? Well, they are these powerful MacGuffin objects that are being sought after in the plot by the dastardly villain Dr. Robotnik, and they are hidden in the bonus round mazes for Sonic to find. And until I looked up a guide, I thought I was just trying to collect a mess of rings in these stages and then get to the end, because after all, it does say goal there. But you're actually not supposed to be trying to get there. You're supposed to be trying to get the Chaos Emerald. And if you get to the place that's marked goal, you'll end the round without getting the Chaos Emerald. What the hell, man? Getting 50 rings in these bonus stages apparently earns a continue. I earned a continue a time or two in my playthrough, but did it by accident. I thought at the time that it was because of the amount of points I had scored, not the rings I had earned in the bonus stages. I think if I replayed knowing how to get continues, the game would probably be less punishing. All that said, I found the controls and game mechanics in these bonus stages to be very cumbersome. Actually getting to the area that has the Chaos Emerald in it is a bitch and a half, and you only get one chance. I imagine this would be a very frustrating game to go for 100% in. There are a lot of little details in this game that I really like. For an early 16-bit game, the graphics are really good. The faux 3D effects, like the revolving thorny cylinder in the Green Hill Zone, and also the waterfall in the foreground of the same zone, look amazing. I love how Sonic has this impatient idle animation. It fits so well with his character. And I also love the animation that occurs when he's standing close to the edge of a platform and is all like, "Wah!" The music's good too. Some of it reminds me of Mario Kart 64. It was all composed by the bass guitarist of a J-pop band. The more you know. I just mentioned the Green Hill Zone a minute ago, so let's talk more about the levels individually. Green Hill Zone is made up of 3 levels that are all really easy, but despite that, it's beautiful to look at, it's a blast to play, and has several alternate paths despite the level designs appearing simplistic on the surface. It wasn't until I looked up maps that I really realized the depth of the level design here. Of course, this aspect of the game becomes much more complex as it goes along. The next area, Marble Zone, is where I really didn't feel like I was playing a Sonic game, because of the cramped spaces and the slow pace, but grew to appreciate its stages nonetheless, despite some annoyances, namely the caterpillars and fireballs. These are underground mazes full of slow-moving pillars with switches you need to activate, platforms you need to float on. You really have to take your time with the killer chandeliers, and the springs that were a cute little novelty in the Green Hill Zone are a death trap here. This is one of those elements in the game that brings you to a screeching halt if you're going too fast without knowing the level well enough. It's where level memorization really begins to become necessary, as well as really deliberate movements, because navigation in the cramped spaces can be a struggle at times. The third act of the Marble Zone includes a segment where if you screw up or you don't know what to do, there is almost no coming back from your mistake. And this is not the only time this happens in the game. The ending of Act 3 can be soul-crushing if you take a hit at the top and then have to tediously make your way all the way back up. That is, if the hit doesn't just kill you and send you back to the last checkpoint, which have to be earned, by the way. If you neglect to flag one, or if you take an alternate path and miss it, well, you're screwed. Spring Yard Zone is a mixed bag. The pinball machine-inspired parts are a joy. Just an absolute gas. But those vertically scrolling blocks slow everything down to a crawl, and can even be confusing if your brain is fried due to the repetition of starting over again and again if you're burning through a lot of lives. Ask me how I know. There's also an invincibility power-up with a placement that was a real head-scratcher to me. There's like no way to actually make use of it. No enemies to mow down, no lava to speed across. Am I missing something? Then later in the same level, there's another that's followed up only by this slow-paced moving block platforming. What the fuck? My most recent playthrough of the game was the time that I made it the furthest, which was to the Labyrinth Zone. I made it to the very end of this zone, but I didn't beat the boss. I decided to put the game back on the shelf for now solely because the Labyrinth Zone was so bad, and I didn't want to play through the parts of the game that I had already played several times just to get back to this fucking place. It's a predominantly underwater zone, and Sonic can't swim. he sinks to the bottom and platforms underwater. And because it's underwater, it, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, slows everything down to a crawl. It's not like the meticulous platforming of the Marble Zone, but like trudging through molasses. You also need to periodically surface from the water or grab air bubbles so Sonic doesn't drown. This didn't really bother me because you get quite a lot of leeway, and I actually never once died as a result of this mechanic, and only came close a time or two. But the zone as a whole is just slow. In one word, slow. Look at how pitiful this jump is. You barely have time to clear the swinging mace thing, and talk about having to take hits to learn. How was I to know before I jumped into the water that a row of spikes was going to be there? There are a lot of annoying enemies as well, and these close quarters are a danger zone for double hits, where the first results in losing your rings and the second in death. And then there's the boss fight against Dr. Robotnik, who is also the boss at the end of all previous zones. And good grief, just look at this. It's straight up comical. Like all other boss battles in this game, if you fail on your first try, subsequent tries can potentially be much more difficult if there aren't easy to reach rings and power-ups in the vicinity on the respawn point. At times, you're blocked from going backwards. This is one of the times where the game does throw you a bone in the form of one shield power-up, but that's it, no more. None of the boss fights in this game are a slouch, by the way. It's one of those games where you can still die after defeating him, and have to do it over again as a result. Ask me how I know. Even the very first boss encounter requires squeezing your way through very tight windows to dodge his attacks, and deal attacks of your own. It's at this point that I need to clarify, I did enjoy this game. So if you've got a rotten vegetable aimed at my head and ready to launch, you can put it away now. It's fun to play, creatively designed, nice to look at, has good music, and is the Genesis, see what I did there? Of an iconic franchise and cool character. It's rough around the edges though, with some weird hitboxes and points where the pace slows down way too much for my liking, and I will always prefer games that emphasize reaction time over memorization. Those issues, and especially the degree of punishment for failure, will prevent it from ever becoming a personal favorite. I do acknowledge, though, that the rewards for mastering levels make the forced repetition a bit more acceptable than it would otherwise be. If you give this game a shot and have trouble like I did, I'd recommend looking up some maps of the levels. For me, at least, that made things a lot more doable. But yeah, when I eventually get around to Sonic 2, I expect that to be a game that I will enjoy more. This has been a Leaky Faucet review, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and for you to subscribe and ring the bell if you'd like to keep up with future videos. In the description, you'll find a link to buy me a coffee if you'd like to support my channel financially. If not, I want you to know that even by simply clicking on my videos, and especially by hanging around to the end, you are supporting me. So thank you for watching, it means a lot. Have a great rest of your life, and game on.